The story kicks off with a dust storm tearing through the land, drying up everything it touches. To survive, people pushed deeper into the canyons, and down there they stumbled on something crazy, mysterious mineral that could actually filter polluted water into clean, drinkable water. This discovery changed everything. A new city was born right in that canyon, built around this endless source of clean water. And to keep it safe, guardians were formed to protect it from invaders. And among those guardians was one man, Zach, who dedicated himself to defending the only city in the world with infinite water. But time went on, and that beloved city eventually died. What was once a miracle of hope had now become a wasteland. Now we jump to the present, and things are a whole mess. Gangsters are wreaking havoc in the streets, fighting cops like it's some kind of twisted sport. These aren't your normal bikers either. Their bikes are modified with chains and guns strapped to the front, and the way they handle the cops? Brutal. They literally use those chains to hook onto police cars and drag them like toys. The cops didn't stand a chance. But among these young officers, there's one guy who stood out, Levin. He wasn't about to let these criminals just slip away. He revved up his own bike and went after them, refusing to bow down to the chaos. The city is completely lawless now. Violence, murder, and even worse, women being traded for water. It's a nightmare, a place where human life feels like it's worth nothing. And right in the middle of this crumbling world, we meet our main character, Zach. The same Zach from the days of the Guardians. Except now he's old. Standing there, seeing what his once protected city has turned into, his heart sank. Poor people starving, desperation everywhere, corruption choking every corner of the streets. He couldn't believe how far it had fallen. Just then, the gangsters stormed through, dragging those police cars behind them like trophies of destruction. And Zach was caught right in the chaos. In that split second, when it looked like he might be crushed, the old Guardian made his move. With precise steps, he dodged death, showing that even though his hair was gray and his body older, the man still had the moves that once made him a legend. Levin, while chasing the gangsters, zoomed past Zach and immediately recognized him. His eyes went wide. There was no mistake about it. The old Guardian had returned. Zach was back in the city. Levin was chasing after the gangsters, but his mind couldn't shake what he just saw. That old man he passed by looked exactly like Zach, the legendary Guardian. Still, he refused to believe it. After all, Zach was supposed to be long gone. But the thought lingered. Meanwhile, the gangsters noticed Levin on their tail. Their leader, Carmel, wasn't about to just let some rookie cop stick around. He turned his bike around and greeted Levin with a storm of bullets. The worst part, innocent citizens were caught in the crossfire. Some were gunned down on the spot, bodies dropping as chaos spread through the streets. And that's when Levin thought to himself, if that old man really was Zach, there's no way he'd just stand by and let this happen. Levin's bike didn't hold up under the barrage. It got shredded and he was thrown to the ground. But instead of finishing him off right there, the gangsters lured him into an alley. Carmel was waiting for him, holding a lighter like some twisted showman, and the ground was covered in gasoline. Levin's fellow officers were trapped inside police cars, injured and unable to escape. And those cars, completely soaked in gas. One spark, and it's all over. Levin aimed his gun at Carmel, shouting for him to drop the lighter. Carmel just smirked, almost mocking him, and pretended to comply. But instead of tossing it aside safely, he let the lighter fall. The moment it hit the ground, flames burst upward, followed by a deafening explosion. The blast consumed everything. Levin's friends, the cops inside those cars, all burned alive right in front of him. The alley turned into a fiery grave. Zach saw the explosion from afar. But instead of rushing to the chaos, he turned and walked deeper into a desolate part of the city, through what looked like a graveyard. He wasn't there to fight, not yet. He was looking for someone. When he found the grave, he knelt down, placed a flower on the stone, and softly apologized for being late. That moment alone showed the weight he carried. Back at the alley, Levin was broken. He fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face, unable to process the horror of watching his comrades die right in front of him. He cried out, begging for someone, anyone, to help. His plea wasn't just for himself, but for the city that had already lost so much. And that's when we remember the heroes of the past, the ones who once brought order to this wasteland. First, there was Hedgehog, the Batwoman whose cape wasn't just for show. It could deflect bullets, even blades, while the edges were sharpened to cut down her enemies with precision. Then there was Cater, the unstoppable wall of muscle. His skin was so tough that even the sharpest blades shattered against it. People called him a monster, but to the city, he was a shield. Next came Grinder, the agile beast, faster than bullets, enhanced with a robotic arm that could transform into an axe. When he swung that thing, no one survived. And finally, Zach, the gunslinger himself, feared and respected as the gunman. His aim was flawless, his bullets always found their mark, and with him leading them, the Guardians were unstoppable. Back then, these four didn't just fight. They brought law, order, and most importantly, water to a dying city. That's why people called them the Guardians. They were the reason the city had hope. But now, the Guardians were gone, and chaos had taken their place. Let's get back to Zach. The old Guardian was still sitting there quietly next to the grave, the weight of years written all over his face. That's when Levin showed up, and the moment he laid eyes on him, there was no doubt left. This wasn't some lookalike. This was Zach himself, the same man from the stories, the same gunslinger who once stood tall above everyone else. Levin felt a mix of awe and anger just staring at him. Part of him even wanted to spit right on that weathered, aged face, but he knew there was no time to waste on something so petty. Still, there was a sense of relief in Levin's chest. Zach had finally received his message. The old man pulled out a strange device that looked like a clock. Turns out, Levin had been sending the same message over and over for years. Lola Twain is dead. Return as soon as possible. He'd prayed every single day that somehow Zach would see it, no matter where he was hiding. And now here he was. Zach thanked him for it, because thanks to that message, he could finally stand at his wife's grave and say goodbye. Yes, the grave he had been visiting all along belonged to his wife, Lola Twain. After paying his respects, Zach stood up, ready to move on. But Levin stopped him, practically begging him to stay, pointing out how the city was collapsing. But come on, let's be real. The man's old, and Zach isn't a guardian anymore. He deserved peace. Levin, however, wasn't letting it go. He shouted that his comrades had died today. That hit something inside Zach, but instead of sympathy, his voice came cold. He told Levin it happened because they were weak, and the weak can't protect anything. Zach turned his back, preparing to leave, but Levin couldn't take it anymore. He rushed forward, grabbed Zach, and lashed out with blame. He accused Zach and the Guardians of letting the city rot, of abandoning it to turn into the lawless hell it had become. Now, don't get it wrong. It wasn't truly Zach's fault, or the Guardians. Levin just needed to say something, anything, to push the old man into staying. Zach stopped him with a bitter truth. It wasn't him who abandoned the city. It was the city that abandoned him. Still, Levin refused to let go. He wanted Zach angry, wanted to provoke him into action, so he crossed the line. He brought up Lola, the woman lying in that grave, asking him with venom, "How long do you think she lasted after you left her?" But Zach's face didn't move. No rage, no sadness, just blank, cold, unshaken. Still, his body told a different story. In one swift motion, Zach grabbed Levin's arms. And in that grip, Levin felt it. Despite his age, despite the lines carved into his skin, Zach's strength was still terrifying. The man hadn't lost it. He was still a monster in his own right. He made it clear to Levin, if he wanted to protect the city, then he had to get stronger. No shortcuts, no excuses. Strength was the only thing that mattered. After leaving the graveyard, he wandered into a bar to get some food and drink some water. The old man sat there, holding a faded picture of himself with his wife Lola. His face might have looked dark and weathered, but the way his eyes lingered on that photo said everything. He truly loved her. The waitress that came by was Anna, still just a young girl. As she poured his water, she peeked at the picture and complimented Zach's wife, saying she was really beautiful. Then, Anna mentioned her own mother had been beautiful too, but she had passed away. She tried to lighten the mood, noting that while their water wasn't as pure as the groundwater from Aria City, it still wasn't bad either. Zach thanked her, and Anna chuckled as she warned him, "From the second glass, you'll have to pay for it, you know?" LOL. The way she slipped that in with a smile almost cracked through his gloomy expression. But peace never lasts long in this city. Trouble walked in. Carmel's friends. A group of rough gangsters swaggered into the place like they owned it. They didn't even wait to be served. They just grabbed drinks straight from the counter, as if the bar belonged to them. The owner, standing firm, reminded them that if they were here about protection money, they needed to take it up with Hades, because he never once missed paying his taxes. But these weren't men who cared about fairness. One of them pressed a gun right to the owner's forehead and even pulled the trigger. The click echoed through the bar. It was empty this time, but that alone showed how little they cared about taking lives. They made it clear. This whole area was now theirs. The owner's hand tightened around a bottle of beer. His voice shook with determination as he said, if they wanted his bar, they'd have to kill him for it. The gangster next to him laughed, smashing a bottle on the wall and mocking him, pointing out how no one in the room would even try to help. And the sad thing? He was right. Everyone sat frozen, too afraid to move. The gangster raised his weapon again, ready to end the owner's life right there. That's when Anna screamed, begging him to stop. But instead of backing off, this bastard turned his gun toward her. A young girl, barely grown, standing defenseless, and he was about to shoot her without a shred of hesitation. And that's when Zach had enough. The old guardian, who had been silent until now, finally decided to move. The gangster didn't even hesitate. He pulled the trigger and fired straight at Anna. But before that bullet could ever touch her, Zach lunged forward, pushing Anna to the side and shielding her. The shot missed, but the madness didn't stop there. The gangster, filled with rage, started unloading his gun into the bar, spraying bullets everywhere like he wanted to kill every single soul in the room. People dropped one after another, dying like flies, and soon his buddy joined in too, turning the whole place into a killing field. Through the chaos, Zach and Anna managed to duck behind cover, holding on as the gunfire ripped the bar apart. The moment the smoke started to clear and the guns went silent, Zach stood up. He didn't just stand, though. He rose from the smoke like a legend. His presence alone froze the room. One of the gangsters tried to raise his gun, but Zach was faster. He grabbed a broken dish from the table beside him and and hurled it with pinpoint precision. The dish spun through the air like a blade, slicing right into the orange-haired gangster's neck. Blood sprayed across the room, splattering onto the face of the man's terrified partner. The sight was so brutal, it painted the walls in red. Fear instantly gripped the last gangster standing because he realized something. Zach was the gunman himself, the guardian they thought was gone forever. And if he could do that with nothing but a broken dish, you can only imagine what he'd unleash once he got his hands on a real gun. The gangster shouted, "What the hell is this old man?" But Zach, calm as ever, gave him a single chance. He said, "If you leave quietly, I won't kill you." Now, any sane person would have bolted immediately after watching their friend's throat get sliced open with a dish, but this fool still thought Zach was bluffing. What a mistake. Zach's eyes alone promised the same bloody fate as the body already lying on the floor. Finally, reality hit him, just like that. He turned tail and ran like the coward he was. Inside the bar, poor Anna was trembling, shaken to her core by the whole ordeal. Around her, not everyone was dead. Some people were badly injured, groaning in pain, but they were still alive, and that was something. But here's where the cruelty of this city really shows. Even after Zach had just saved them from certain death, the survivors turned on him. Their voices rose in fear, demanding he leave. They argued that more gangsters would come now, seeking revenge, and if Zach stayed, it would bring even greater trouble. The bar owner, however, was staring hard at him. He finally put the pieces together. This was Zach, the former guardian. But the owner wasn't grateful, oh no. He warned Zach that the rest of the gang would be coming soon, a wave of bloodthirsty men ready to burn everything down. Zach, unfazed, just told him coldly, "Call the police," and turned to leave. But before he could make it out the door, the owner shouted after him, "You've always been irresponsible, Zach. Just like when you left this city in the hands of those monsters." Zach was on the road again, and here's a quick detail you shouldn't miss. Those direction signs saying "Last Pub Goodbye" and "Last Village"? Yup, those weren't just random names. The gangsters actually destroyed those places. If you didn't obey them, they'd wipe out your entire village or pub without hesitation. That's how ruthless they were. Now back to Zach. Anna had followed him, handed him a bottle of water, and thanked him for saving her. Then she gave him back that photo of himself with his wife, even though the little container holding it was broken. But Zach wasn't the sentimental type anymore. He told her he'd already said his goodbye to his wife, so he didn't need that picture. But Anna opened up, saying her father always spoke of Zach, always telling her how he protected their beautiful city. Zach, though, he stayed cold. He told her to go find some help, and then continued on his path alone. Now let's switch scenes to Levin. This man was gearing up for war. He loaded up a car with rifles and ammunition, turned to his colleagues, and straight up asked them if no one cared about justice in this city anymore. He wanted to know how long they'd all just sit around doing nothing while gangsters destroyed everything. But you can't really blame them. Everyone saw what happened to the cops who tried to resist the gangsters. They ended up dead. That's when Chief Richard stepped in, saying they were already working their asses off. And then came the new report. The gangsters were planning to burn down an entire village. Richard brushed it off, saying it was just a village and had nothing to do with the public order of Aria City. And honestly, Richard was a coward, afraid of death and more afraid of losing his position than protecting lives. Levin wasn't having it. He pushed back, asking how many villagers had already disappeared while Richard sat in his chair. Richard snapped, grabbed Levin, and shouted they were all just trying to survive in this madness. But Levin saw right through it. He knew those were just excuses coming from a man who lacked the guts to act. Levin declared he was going to stop the gangsters, with or without Richard's help. Richard gave him one last warning. Don't come back, because if he did, his rank as sergeant would be stripped away. Levin didn't care. He got in his car, drove off, and in the quiet of that drive, he came to a grim realization. He had no choice but to ask the devil for help. That's when he reached out to someone, sending the message that he was on his own again. Let's shift inside the city for a moment. Up above, an eagle was circling the skies, sharp eyes scanning everything below. But this wasn't just any eagle. It belonged to a mysterious figure who was quietly watching how things were unfolding. Now back to our old man Zach, who had been walking all night long through the emptiness. The sun was blazing down on him, heat burning his skin, and he finally stopped to take a sip from the bottle Anna had given him. His thoughts drifted back to Anna and the others. Deep down, he knew they were in danger. That's when he muttered quietly to himself, "Lola, I'm not a guardian anymore. I can't protect them." And right in front of him, fate decided to play its hand. Carmel and his gang had shown up, ready to burn down the very village where Anna and the others were staying. The moment they spotted Zach, Carmel raised his hand, signaling his men to stop. One of the thugs, the same guy who ran away yesterday, immediately recognized Zach and told Carmel this was the man who killed their friend. Now here's where you'd expect Zach to fight back, to pull off some crazy last stand. But no, the poor old man had reached his breaking point. Instead of resisting, Zach calmly placed his cap inside his bag, lifted his hands, and surrendered. Looking Carmel straight in the eye, he told him, "Kill me, but leave the village alone. Let's get back to Levin." He finally made it to the village, but something caught his eye immediately. A crowd of villagers had gathered, all staring down at something. nothing. Levin introduced himself, saying he was a police officer, and pushed his way through to see what was going on. Right there on the ground lay the corpse of the gangster Zach had killed yesterday. Levin asked the people who was responsible for this, and that's when Anna stepped forward. She held out Zach's photo. Levin pondered why Zach would do something like this. The bar owner spoke up, explaining the truth. If it weren't for Zach, both Anna and he would already be dead. But there was no time to dwell on it. Word spread fast that Carmel and his men were on their way to burn the whole village down. Panic hit the villagers, and many were ready to run, knowing full well the police couldn't save them this time. That's when Levin stepped up. He grabbed a rifle, handed it to the bar owner, and told him they needed to start building barricades if they wanted to stand a chance. Then Levin turned to everyone else and shouted, "You can protect yourselves." His words lit a fire in them. Even the bar owner, who had nothing but his bar left, declared he wouldn't run or die without a fight. His resolve spread through the crowd, and one by one, the villagers agreed to stand and fight for their home. Meanwhile, the situation for Zach was turning into a nightmare. The gangsters had chained him to a bike and were dragging him along the rocky path as they sped toward the village. His body was being torn apart, bloodied and battered, every bump on the harsh road making it worse. He had surrendered, given himself up in hopes of saving the village, yet these monsters still had every intention of burning it to the ground. The villagers, led by Levin, worked fast. They set up a barricade and, thanks to Levin, every single one of them had a rifle in hand. Carmel and his gang rolled in. The bar owner, fueled with anger, was ready to pull the trigger right away, but Levin held him back, telling him to wait, to let the bastards come closer before firing. Carmel, on the other hand, looked at the scene and smirked. Seeing the villagers armed and standing their ground, he turned to Zach, almost mocking him, and said, "Guess I won't go easy on them now." But Zach, chained, bloodied, and barely standing, still pleaded with Carmel, begging him to kill him instead and spare the villagers. That's when Carmel, in true cowardly fashion, ordered one of his men to speed forward, dragging Zach even more across the dirt and rocks. The villagers winced watching his body bounce and scrape against the ground. The bar owner, overwhelmed with rage, tried to fire, but once again Levin stopped him, his sharp eyes fixed on Zach. He knew they couldn't risk hitting the old man. Then, as if Zach's suffering wasn't enough, the gangster dragged him right up close before yanking him off and hurling his broken body toward the barricade. Carmel stepped forward, no more games in his tone. He made it clear for everyone to hear, "You're all dead." Then he turned to his men with a grin and said, "Have some fun." Before Carmel and his men could even react, a knife came flying through the air and struck the thug who had just hurled Zach. It hit him right in the neck, and in that instant, his head was literally sent flying off. Finally, that piece of trash was gone for good. And the one who ended him? None other than the Batwoman herself, Hedgehog. She didn't stop there. Hedgehog leapt forward, hurled another knife, and this one cut straight through the chains holding Zach, setting him free. Carmel, furious, immediately barked out the order for his men to kill her. Hedgehog, with that sharp tongue of hers, shot back that Zach was as stupid as ever if he thought the gang would stop just because they had him. The gangsters closed in fast, but Levin wasn't about to let Zach get caught again. He grabbed him and pulled him towards safety, while Hedgehog prepared to face the mob head-on. She whipped her cape around, slicing through a bike and the thug riding it in one clean motion. Then, with her daggers flashing, she cut down two more who rushed her without hesitation. Remember when Levin told someone he was on his own again? Turns out that was just a front. He was actually working with Hedgehog all along. Now, Hedgehog wasn't always like this. Once, she was a guardian, a protector, but those days are long gone. What stands before them now is no savior. She's a demon, driven by nothing but the thirst for the blood of her enemies. Hedgehog tossed Zach his beloved revolver, the one weapon that had always been his symbol. She barked at him to pick it up, but Zach just stood there, frozen. That hesitation lit a fire in Hedgehog's eyes. She lunged at him, furious, shouting for him to pick up his goddamn revolver. Still, Zach refused. He said he had no right to carry that gun anymore. That's when Hedgehog dropped the truth on him. The revolver wasn't just a weapon, it was a promise. Lola, Zach's wife, had left it with Hedgehog. Lola believed, until her very last breath, that Zach would return to protect the city. She held on to that hope even as she was dying. Zach, with guilt heavy in his voice, explained why he left. He said he walked away to keep Lola and the other guardians alive, to protect them by staying out of the fight. But Hedgehog wasn't buying it. She cut him down with her words, telling him he didn't protect anyone. He just ran away like a coward. And right then, Carmel and his men opened fire. Bullets ripped through the air. Hedgehog reacted instantly, dashing forward and grabbing Zach, dragging him out of the line of fire. The gang kept shooting, their guns mounted on bikes spitting lead into the crowd. Innocent people started getting hit. In the chaos, Hedgehog herself took a hit, but she didn't falter. She refused to crumble, refused to be like Zach. Instead, she pulled out her daggers and dashed straight into the storm of bullets, making it clear with every step she was going to bring this city back, even if it meant drowning the streets in blood. Hedgehog pulled up her hood and dashed, slicing down anyone foolish enough to get close. Carmel wasn't about to sit back, though. He revved up the minigun mounted to his bike and unleashed a hail of bullets, screaming at at his men to finish her off. But Hedgehog wasn't going down that easy. Her cape whipped around her, shielding her from the storm of lead. More of Carmel's men lunged at her, but she was too fast. Knives flew from her hands, stopping them before they could even touch her. She held her ground, cutting left and right, bodies dropping as she carved her way forward. And just when she was about to reach Carmel, the tables turned. One of the thugs grabbed Anna, pressing a gun to her head, shouting for Hedgehog to stop. And as if that wasn't enough, another stepped up beside him, flamethrower in hand, threatening to torch the villagers if she dared move. For the first time, Hedgehog was cornered. They had her in checkmate. That's when Carmel made his move. With a wicked grin, he hurled a hook chain, wrapping it around Hedgehog and locking her in place. The crowd gasped. This was it. Hope drained from the air. Everyone thought it was over. Despair settled in like a heavy fog. And then bang, a single gunshot cracked through the chaos. The man holding Anna dropped, a chunk of his brain splattering the ground. A clean hole through his forehead. Every eye turned, stunned, not believing what they just saw. And then came the reveal. The one who fired that shot was none other than the old man himself. The man with the flamethrower was just about to roast everyone inside the house when Hedgehog's eagle swooped in like a total hero and clawed at his eyes. That gave Hedgehog the perfect opening to cut the chains holding her, and, without missing a beat, she flung her hook straight at the flamethrower guy, blowing up his gear and turning him into ashes. On the other side, Zach had taken a hit and collapsed to his knees. That's when the bar owner yelled at the villagers to grab their rifles and chase the gangsters off. And just like that, the villagers opened fire and sent the gangsters running for their lives. Carmel spun around, yelling at his men not to run, but then he froze. Something was coming straight at him. Hedgehog threw her knife, and if Carmel hadn't tilted his head, he'd be a goner. She didn't stop there. She charged at him, but Carmel pressed a button on his bike and spilled some gasoline just as she got close. The next thing, the bike roared to life and exploded, stopping Hedgehog in her tracks. Quick on his feet, he kicked one of his men, grabbed the guy's bike, and took off with the rest of his crew. Thanks to Levin and the two guardians, the villagers were still alive and had successfully defended their home. Everyone was celebrating after driving the gangsters off. Zach, injured and barely conscious, collapsed, while Anna, tears streaming down her face, thanked him for saving her. Then the villagers realized who this old man really was. It was Zach, the leader of the guardians, though noticeably older than in his prime. Hedgehog, ever the badass, grabbed Zach and was about to leave. Levin asked her to help save the city alongside Zach, but she just smirked, telling him not to get his hopes up and promising they'd meet again soon before swinging away with her grapple hook, clearly still convincing everyone she wasn't a Batwoman. With that, despair turned into hope. Zach was back. Maybe it was just a flicker of hope, but the moment his revolver fired its first shot, that spark ignited in the villagers, filling them with a fresh sense of courage and determination. Levin got back to the Aria City Police Department, only to find Richard waiting. As soon as Levin tried to step inside, Richard stopped him, reminding him he'd said not to come back. Levin explained the biker gang was still on the move and he needed more rifles and ammo to get ready. He made it crystal clear he didn't need Richard's help and was going in to warn everyone about what happened in the village, and that Zach, the Guardian, was back. Richard heard it, but he couldn't care less. He had his own plans. Then an armored vehicle rolled in, and the mayor's bodyguards immediately swarmed Levin. One of them smacked him in the head. The vehicle turned, and inside was Carmel. They'd finally caught him. He got thrown to the ground, begging for his life. That's when Slade showed up, the guy in the red coat dragging a massive scythe, one of the mayor's top enforcers. Without a second thought, Slade sliced through Carmel's chained hands, letting him really feel the pain. Let's just say this guy is straight up insane. Then Slade turned his attention to Levin, who didn't even flinch, and told them flat out they were all useless now that Zach was back. Slade heard Levin's words and just lost it, laughing like a maniac. Zach is back, who cares? Then he raised his scythe to finish Levin off, but stopped at the last second, clearly cooking up some plan with him. Meanwhile, Hedgehog had returned to her underground base, and it was not a pretty sight. The cells were packed with criminals, some injured, some already dead from hunger. She shouted at them, telling them they'd all die once Mayor Hades was executed, as if they weren't already basically ghosts. To make things worse, even Zach was locked up, and despite his age, the man's physique was still impressive. Hedgehog grabbed her revolver, aimed it at his head, and clicked the trigger. Her expression darkened as she asked if the sound still gave him joy. Zach stayed calm, saying he was just here to say goodbye to his wife Lola. That sent Hedgehog into a mix of anger and disbelief. What's the point of coming back if you're the reason she's gone? She was about to pull the trigger again, but Zach calmly explained he had no choice but to leave. Frustrated, Hedgehog tossed the revolver aside, telling him that cowards always have excuses, and that now she alone was protecting the city, so she didn't need him. She moved to her main room, packed with all kinds of weapons, treated her wound, poured alcohol over it, and pulled the bullet from her arm. Then she uncovered Zach's suite, thinking he had already missed his chance. Suddenly, her alarm blared. Investigating, she saw Levin standing out in the open with Carmel, facing execution in front of the people. At the same time, Slade, flanked by the mayor's bodyguards, words, addressed the citizens of Aria City, announcing he had a very important message to deliver. Slade kept talking, making it sound all noble, saying Mayor Hades wants peace for the city, but the people before them plunged it into chaos. Then he turned to the citizens and asked what should be done with the criminals. Of course, no one spoke. Nobody wants blood everywhere. Slade slammed his scythe into the ground, saying death is the only fitting punishment. But let's be real, he's just bullying the citizens into agreeing. Not long after, the crowd started shouting for death for the criminals. Back at the base, Hedgehog dragged Zack's suit into his cell and laid it out for him. She told him no one remembers the blood they spilled protecting the city. All they remember is Zack as the guardian who ran away. The suit was her way of lifting his spirits. She told him not to waste time on self-pity because she was going to save Levin, the young man who had stepped up to protect the city Zack had left behind. Meanwhile, Slade gave the order to start the execution. They began suffocating one of Carmel's men. Under pressure, Carmel admitted he had been working with Slade, but since Slade had the upper hand, he had been betrayed. Once that man died, it was Levin's turn. The young man struggled as they suffocated him, tears streaming down his face, white foam forming at his mouth. At that moment, it seemed like this was truly the end for Levin. Just in the nick of time, Hedgehog swooped in and threw her knife, slicing the rope choking Levin and taking out the guards around him without missing a beat. She immediately went for Slade, but he was fast, blocking her knife. The citizens, seeing the chaos, started running, and Carmel used the distraction to dash through them and escape. Back in Zack's cell, Lola's soul appeared from the suit, brushing against his face. She told him Hedgehog was just lonely and that Aria City, soaked in blood, was more than she could handle alone. She made it clear, Hedgehog needs Zack right now. Hedgehog and Slade were going head-to-head, trading blocks and counters, neither giving an inch. Levin was shouting at her, but the guards around him were hitting him over and over. Hedgehog didn't waste time. She dashed in, throwing knives that struck them all at once, then scooped Levin up and shielded him with her bullet-deflecting cape. Just when it seemed like they had a chance, one guard fired a massive metal web trap, ensnaring both Hedgehog and Levin. Before they could even think, more armored vehicles rolled in, and now even more guards had their guns trained on them. Back with Zack, Lola's soul lingered a moment longer, reminding him he can't give up now, and that it's time for Zack, the guardian of Aria City, to rise again. Fully determined, his spirit reignited. He summoned every ounce of strength and broke free from the chains holding him. Then he put on his suit, and just like old times, the man still had all the tricks from his prime. Watching him handle those revolvers, it's clear he hasn't lost a step. Hedgehog and Levin were under fire from every direction. Thanks to her cape, they were still holding on, but Hedgehog couldn't focus on escaping. The incoming gunfire kept her on defense as she protected Levin. That's when Zack made his entrance, riding in on a bike. One shot from his revolver, and kaboom, two heavy armored vehicles were blown to pieces. Old man Zack was back in action, moving, shooting, and causing explosions like he never aged a day. Seeing the old Zack return, Hedgehog couldn't hold back her tears. It wasn't sadness. It was the kind of overwhelming rush you feel when you realize the legend you thought was gone is standing right there, alive and unstoppable. Zack dashed forward, riding that bike with the kind of skill that makes you forget he's not 20 anymore. Then, without hesitation, he launched himself off it. At the same instant, Hedgehog swung her hook to pull herself out of the way. The bike kept flying forward, and Zack, with perfect timing, fired a shot midair. Boom. The bike exploded, and the blast shattered the statue nearby. The falling debris smashed into the armored vehicles surrounding them. What can I say? Zack didn't just make an entrance. He turned the whole place into chaos with one move. Slade stood there, stunned. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. This wasn't just some old man fighting back. This was Zack, the leader of the Guardians. But the guards didn't get the memo. More of them rushed in, thinking they could bring him down. Zack spun, firing shot after shot, and not a single bullet went to waste. Every shot landed exactly where it needed to. Precise as hell. And in that moment, with the smoke rising, the guards falling, and the city watching, the legend of Aria City's guardian was reborn. Slade's temper was boiling over. Finally, he snapped and barked out new orders. His guards didn't hesitate. They rolled out these small tanks, each one armed with machine guns. When those tanks got close to each other, they generated a force field strong enough to block bullets. A moving wall of steel and energy. The guards opened fire, unleashing a storm of bullets at Zack. But Zack wasn't about to be an easy target. He dropped down low, slipping past their line of fire. Then, with both revolvers blazing, he countered. His shots were precise, but the force field stopped every single bullet. That's when Slade burst into laughter. He thought he had Zack cornered. He even mocked him, calling him no guardian at all, just a coward who ran away from his past. But Zack wasn't about to let that slide. He reminded Slade that he wasn't the only guardian here. And right on cue, Hedgehog appeared midair, swinging in. She struck fast, tearing through the small tanks before darting away. Her attack cracked open their defenses, and that was all Zack needed. The old man surged forward, revolvers in hand, and this time nothing stood in his way. He fired left and right, tearing through the mini tanks, explosions lighting up the battlefield. Chaos spread everywhere, and suddenly the hunters had become the hunted. Seeing all his units wiped out, Slade panicked and tried to run, but Zack wasn't having it. He swung a rope, snared Slade by the neck, and there was no way this coward was getting away. With Zack back, Aria City was about to rise again. Zack showed mercy, but Hedgehog had other plans. She raised her knife, ignoring Zack's attempts to stop her, and sliced off Slade's hands. Later, they used his blood to write a message on his back. Guardians are back. Honestly, Slade got exactly what he deserved. Now, shift to a mysterious hooded man arriving at Hades's palace. Inside, Hades was running all kinds of experiments on humans. The hooded man took the elevator up to where Hades was waiting. Hades ordered him to bring Zack to him. The hooded man bowed and left, but something felt off. Hades sensed the tension immediately. The moment the hooded man stepped out, Hades contacted someone, warning them to follow and kill the hooded man if he tried to double-cross. Clearly, Hades isn't just powerful, he's smart and cautious. Levin stormed back into the department, ready to confront Richard for betraying him. Richard, that coward, tried to wiggle out with a lame excuse, saying he was just following Hades' orders. Knowing he was cornered, he shifted the blame, claiming it was Levin and the two Guardians' fault that the whole city was about to turn into a battlefield. Hedgehog had had enough. She was ready to end him right there. But Zack stopped her, telling her not to let the darkness consume her completely. Hedgehog didn't hold back, telling Zack that people like Richard were eating away at the city, and dealing with them required being even crueler than they were. Zack pulled her into a hug, praising her for holding on this long alone, and telling her she could finally let herself relax. Hedgehog started crying, but these were tears of relief and happiness. She had finally found someone she could truly rely on. After that, Levin and the two Guardians piled into Levin's police car and headed out. Zack pointed out that just the two of them weren't enough to make Aria City safe again, and told Hedgehog he was going to bring in the Jigachad Cater. Levin wanted to tag along, but Hedgehog had other plans. She was going to focus on making Levin stronger before anything else. Zack was making his way up a tall cliff, heading straight for his friend Cater. The path was full of holes, but we'll get why soon enough. Up ahead, massive machines were operating Aria City's drilling equipment, with Cater digging holes everywhere. That's when Cater heard Zack calling out. They didn't say a word, just closed the distance and shook hands, greeting each other the old-fashioned way. Cater flicked on the radio, and both of them lit cigarettes, sharing a quiet moment. It was a reunion full of tension, standing close, neither speaking, yet both knowing exactly what the other was thinking. Cater finally broke the silence, pointing out there was no water here either, and Zack just nodded. Then assassins sent to kill Zack showed up. Both Zack and Cater noticed them immediately, but they didn't rush, no sudden moves. The assassins went straight for it, throwing multiple explosions their way, testing the waters. The moment the assassins clicked their triggers, the explosives went kaboom, but Zack and Cater leapt forward, just out of the blast's range. As the assassins charged, Cater swung up his hammer while Zack pulled out his revolvers, back to back, ready for anything. Zack muttered an apology for bringing the assassins into the mix, but Jigachad Cater just grinned, calling it a reunion present, and he actually liked it. Among the attackers was the hooded man Hades had sent, and here's the twist. This guy was Grinder, one of the Guardians and a friend of Zack and Cater. Time had changed him, though. Now he was working under Mayor Hades. The assassins triggered another explosion midair, filling the area with thick smoke. Cater didn't even flinch. He just stood there, letting the blades fly. Any weapon that touched him would shatter instantly. Cater swung his hammer like it was a deadly metronome. One hit and you're gone. One assassin managed to stab him, but the blade barely scratched him. The man's physique is unreal. Cater shattered the blade and with a single, brutal swing, took the assassin down. Zack got ambushed in the smoke. He fired his revolvers, but the assassin was fast, striking from behind. Zack was ready, though. He blocked the attack with one revolver and used the other to shoot off the assassin's arm. Turns out, this guy's limbs were all robotic. Now it makes sense why the mayor's been experimenting on people inside his palace. The assassin managed to escape, but two more lunged at Zack. Quick on the draw, he shot off their limbs before they could even touch him. Cater then dashed in, swinging his hammer and smacking both of them to the ground. More assassins swarmed in, but Zack and Carter locked into each other's rhythm, clean, and dropped anyone who dared get close. Their teamwork wasn't flashy, it was smooth, efficient. For the stragglers still circling, Zack made it crystal clear. Their tricks were useless here, the game was over. Then Carter did something that made everyone pause. He yanked the ruined blade out of his own body, winced once, grabbed a staple gun, and sealed up his cuts like a man patching a torn jacket before a job interview. Zack followed with something harder than any punch, mercy. He told the assassins to lower their weapons, and reminded them that being Hades' men didn't mean they all had to die tonight. That's when their leader stepped in. Grinder decided to join the fight himself. Zack freezes for a second. He knows that face, his old friend. But instead of a reunion, Grinder lays it out cold. These assassins aren't really Hades' men. Their lives, their very citizenship, depends on whether they can kill Zack. That's the twisted deal they're stuck in. Then Grinder waves his hand, ordering his men to stand down. He's not letting anyone else touch this fight. He'll handle Zack and Carter himself. Grinder's arm shifts, morphing into a massive axe, gleaming and heavy, ready to strike. Zack can't wrap his head around it. Why would a guardian, someone sworn to protect, be serving Hades of all people? Grinder doesn't give him time to think. He lunges, axe swinging with brutal force. Zack slips out of the way. Grinder tries to catch him with a quick counter, but Zack reads him and dodges again. Then steel meets steel. Zack raises his revolver and blocks the crushing axe strike. The truth comes out. Zack was exiled, banished by the mayor of Aria City, Hades himself. Why? Because of one mistake. One mistake so big it nearly doomed the entire world. Back then, Hades' men had planted bombs all across the city. Not just in buildings, but inside themselves. Human bombs ready to blow. And standing in the middle of it all was Slade, carrying Hades' message straight to Zack. Zack was cornered with the cruelest choice imaginable. Either die alongside the city he loved or swallow his pride and die alone. To make it worse, they had captured his wife, tortured her, and forced her to watch him make that impossible decision. The citizens, forgetting all the peace Zack had brought them, cheered for Hades to become the new mayor and demanded Zack's exile. Even Zack couldn't help but wonder, if he had known his mistake would lead to this nightmare, would he have done the same thing? Back in the fight, Grinder kept attacking relentlessly, but Zack blocked every blow with his twin revolvers. Amid this heated battle, one of Hades' men tried to step in to help Grinder, but another stopped him, saying he wanted to watch how the Guardians fought each other. It was pure entertainment for him. The second man reminded him that Grinder had once been Zack's ally, but he didn't care. He pulled out a control remote and revealed a nasty trick. Grinder had a bomb implanted in his chest. If Grinder betrayed them, the explosion would take out Zack too. Two birds, one stone. At one point, Zack even stopped defending and Grinder started kicking him. Zack regained his balance, but when he stopped defending completely, Grinder didn't hold back, raining blows down on him. Now let's check in on Hedgehog and Levin, who are in the middle of a sparring session. Levin's still weak and has a lot to learn, but training with Hedgehog is giving him a real sense of how strong the other Guardians might be, maybe even stronger than her. Curiosity got the better of him, and he asked if the other Guardians were still alive. Hedgehog kept it real, telling him that only Zack, as the leader, can shoulder the burdens of their pasts. Then she snapped him back to focus, ordering him to get up and cutting off any more idle chatter during training. She made it clear, never let go of your weapon, because that weapon is your life. Back in the heat of battle, Zack hit the ground, not defeated, but letting himself take the fall. Grinder switched from axe mode to sword mode, powering himself up and declaring that as the Guardian Grinder, he was going to kill Zack. Just as he was about to land the fatal blow, Cater jumped in, stopping him in his tracks. Cater stepped in, stopping Grinder's blade just in time, but even with all his strength, he was barely holding it back. The charged blade pressed against his shoulder, starting to cut deeper with every second, yet Cater refused to give an inch. He reminded Grinder of the rule all Guardians followed: they don't fight their comrades. Grinder shoved more power into the blade, demanding to know why Cater was protecting Zack. Cater's simple reply: because Zack is his friend. Zack, old and battered, saw his revolver and memories came rushing back. The day he surrendered, the pain, his wife being tortured and captured, and her voice shouting at him not to give up. That same voice now echoed in Zack's mind, urging him to pick up his gun. As he reached for his revolver, Grinder noticed and swung his blade to the side, trying to pry it from Cater's shoulder before Zack could get a shot off. Grinder flipped backward, creating distance, then switched his arm from sword to a massive gun. Fully charged, it could unleash total destruction. He shouted at them, asking if they were really happy back then, having to spill blood and fight every single day. But deep down, everyone knew that fighting with honor to protect the city wasn't a mistake. Grinder, however, refused to see the whole picture. He still believed Hades had united the bandits to create some twisted world where they could coexist. Zack, seeing no other choice, pointed his revolver at his old friend. It was time to settle this. Grinder fired his fully charged gun, and in the same instant, Zack fired an explosive bullet, meeting the attack head-on. The charged energy barreled toward Zack, but he dodged at the last second. The blast exploded behind him and Cater, shaking the ground with a massive shockwave. Zack's explosive bullet hit Grinder's robotic arm, disabling his gun just in time. Gigachad Cater, ever the hero, shielded Zack from falling metal, scooped him up, and jumped into the car waiting in front of them. Inside, Zack still wanted to fight, ignoring his injuries, but Cater reminded him of the golden rule: they don't fight their comrades. To lighten the mood, he added that he still had a glass of whiskey to share with his old friend. That made Zack smile, and then immediately faint, completely worn out from his injuries. Cater hit the gas, driving them away from Grinder and his men. Meanwhile, Grinder's men wanted him to chase them, but he calmly removed the bullet from his robotic arm, muttering that Zack might still come in handy after all. Grinder's men wanted to chase after Zack and Cater, but Grinder wasn't having it. After all, he's a guardian too, just like his friends. One of the men tried to trigger the bomb implanted in Grinder's chest, but before he could, Grinder dashed forward, slicing off his arm and then his head, making it painfully clear that anyone in his way would meet the same fate. As more men rushed in, Grinder went full brutal mode, slashing left and right, taking them down one by one. The scene was pure carnage. One tried to escape, but Grinder calmly shot him down with his gun, then went for the switch, muttering that this was the price he had to pay for his sins. Meanwhile, Cater arrived at Hedgehog's hideout, carrying the unconscious Zack. Seeing Zack struggling to breathe, Levin realized he had to get stronger. Rescuing the city couldn't fall on just these three. On the other side, Carmel, even after losing his arms, was still alive. His crew worked to build him new robotic arms, and once they were complete, Carmel's only thought was revenge against Hades and the Guardians. Levin stayed right by Zack's side, and when the old man finally woke up, he'd been out for half a day, Levin handed him some water. Zack started talking about the past, about the days he fought without rest, how he and his allies carried their injuries like medals of honor, all earned protecting Aria City from anyone who threatened it. They thought peace would last forever, as long as the Guardians were there. But the more they sacrificed, the more the people took it for granted, forgetting to watch the corrupt politics creeping in. Hades' lies turned the citizens against the mayor, spreading rumors that the mayor and Guardians had a monopoly on everything. Frustrated and angry at the people's attacks, the Guardians began quitting their honorable duties, one by one. Meanwhile, Hades used Aria City's enemies to consolidate his power. Watching all that happen after years of fighting, Zack realized he couldn't risk losing any more loved ones to Hades' insane grab for control, so he stepped down. Back in the present, Zack was exhausted and asked Levin to deliver a message to Cater. His whiskey plans were on hold for now. Then Zack turned to the side to get some much-needed rest, preparing for the next battle. Levin couldn't hold it in. He started crying, apologizing, explaining that the citizens had known the truth all along, but they just needed someone to blame for their resentment. Hedgehog and Cater were keeping an eye on Hades' men. Hedgehog noticed something. Grinder never tried to stop her, which meant he had a reason for everything he'd done. She also knew they couldn't stay hidden like rats forever. Sooner or later, Hades would find them. Cater tried to calm her down, telling her not to worry. Zack would wake up soon. Now back to Grinder, who returned to Hades' base. The moment he stepped in, Hades was waiting, standing tall beside two weirdly short, green-skinned robots. Let's just call them goblins. Hades demanded an explanation for why Grinder had come back. Grinder just smirked. Hades pressed further, asking if Grinder was really sure, if he disappeared, who would control the city. But the truth was clear. The people weren't controlled by politics. They were controlled through fear and power. Grinder's real reason for returning? To take down Hades and claim his position as mayor of Aria City. Grinder switched to axe mode, revealing that from the start, he had been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He dashed in, and Hades immediately ordered the two goblins to attack and kill him. Grinder swung his axe and sliced the first goblin clean in two. Regaining his balance, he turned to the second one, beheaded it, and smashed its body to bits before kicking the head straight back at Hades. Honestly, these goblins weren't much of a challenge. That's when Hades decided to step in himself. Turns out, the guy had fused his body with robotics too. As Grinder charged, Hades injected himself with a glowing green liquid, powering up from behind. The sheer shock of it made Grinder pause for just a moment, realizing this fight was about to get way more intense. Grinder thought Hades' power was just a trick, so he attacked, but Hades blocked him completely. Now Grinder knew this was no game. Still, he managed to free himself and tried to deploy his gun to charge a shot, but Hades lunged at him. Even when Grinder fired, Hades absorbed the attack, grabbed his robotic arm, and ripped it out, causing a massive explosion. Just then, Slade and a ton of guards stormed in. Grinder realized he couldn't survive this, so he bolted, dodging bullets left and right as Hades ordered the guards to shoot him down. Hades then commanded Slade to find Zack's hiding spot and crush anyone who resisted, reminding him this was his last chance to prove himself. Hades' body started showing cracks, his hair falling and blood coming out as his self-experiments began taking a toll. Shift the scene to a mine controlled by Hades, filled with machines along a train, all set to mine emeralds. Suddenly, guards got shot, explosions erupting everywhere. And who's causing the chaos? Carmel and his men, with Carmel shouting orders to wipe every last one of them out. Carmel's men went full chaos mode, shooting everyone in their way. Guards and even citizens working in the mine didn't stand a chance. The train driver called out for the police, begging for help, but before anyone could respond, Carmel himself smashed through the door and killed the driver. Now the train was completely under Carmel's control, and he was driving it straight toward Aria City, planning to use it to take out Zack and Hades. Meanwhile, back at the police department, Richard realized all the bodyguards had gone to Death Valley chasing the traitor, leaving only those defending City Hall. Knowing he'd be blamed if nothing was done, Richard ordered his men to head to the railway bridge immediately. One officer hesitated, asking if they shouldn't try to save the miners first, but Richard didn't care. His only goal was to stop that train from entering Aria City. The policemen felt guilty, but they knew that if they didn't follow orders, it wouldn't change the bigger picture anyway. Now let's shift back to our guardians. Hedgehog and Cater weren't about to sit idle while Carmel and his men Levin ran wild. Levin informed them that Richard was planning to destroy the railway bridge before the train reached the city. Hedgehog regretted not taking Richard out back then, but Zack appeared, saying the chief wasn't completely wrong. Even though he hadn't rested and his body was still battered, Zack refused to stay on the sidelines. He was joining his allies in this fight. Luckily, our guardians had their own small train ready. Hedgehog handed Levin a rifle and said, "Let's go, Guardian." Carmel and his men were holding the citizens inside the train as hostages, barreling toward Aria City. That's when a bullet suddenly tore through, taking one of them down. Yup, the guardians had arrived. Carmel's men and the guardians started exchanging gunfire, shots flying in every direction, but when Zack fired, he didn't miss. Hedgehog then launched her grapple hook, grabbed Zack, and swung over onto the train where Carmel's men were, ready to strike. Hedgehog and Zack managed to climb to the top of the train. One of Carmel's men suddenly raised a rocket launcher and fired at the smaller train where Carter and Levin were still inside. The rocket screamed through the air, but before it could hit, Carter grabbed Levin and leapt with him onto the other train. A heartbeat later, the explosion tore through the carriage they had just escaped, flames bursting. The gangsters swarmed onto the train roof, determined to stop Zack and Hedgehog. Down below, the citizens caught word that the Guardians had arrived. Hope spread quickly among them, but Carmel's men silenced the crowd with threats and violence. Zack steadied his aim, every shot finding its mark. Hedgehog's knives cut through the air, striking her targets with deadly precision. Inside the train, Carter fought with his fists, dropping anyone who dared get close, while Levin covered him, firing at anyone who tried to line up a shot. When Carmel learned that Zack was interfering, his fury boiled over. His voice roared above the chaos as he gave the order. "Kill everyone. Right now. No survivors." The men didn't know what to do to stop the Guardians, until Carmel gave them the order. Use explosives. He wasn't finished there. He destroyed the train's brakes, making sure nothing could stop it from racing straight into Aria City. The gangsters carried so many explosives that if they went off, the entire city would be reduced to ashes. Then, a bullet ripped through the air and shattered the handle of the explosives box. That was Zack's warning shot. His message was clear. The next bullets would be aimed at their heads. Hedgehog quickly turned to the citizens, telling them to move to the cabin at the back of the train, the safest place left. Relief spread through the crowd. The Guardians had returned. Hope was alive again. Hedgehog then faced Carmel's men and ordered them to throw down their weapons and leave. Showing mercy in the middle of chaos, she gave them a chance. And they took it. One by one, they dropped their guns and backed away. But Carmel himself wasn't about to surrender. He stormed in, his massive robotic arms gleaming, and shoved Carter aside with brutal force. Zack opened fire, but Carmel raised those arms like shields, blocking every shot. Then, with a twisted grin, he activated one of the bombs. Carmel sacrificed himself in an attempt to take Zack down with him. At the last moment, Carter dashed forward and shoved Zack aside, taking the hit himself. The train was already dangerously close to entering Aria City, where Richard and his police force were waiting. The explosion tore through the air. Carter survived, using his back to shield his allies from the blast, but the force launched Zack high into the sky. Hedgehog reacted instantly, firing her hook so Zack could grab it before being thrown away completely. Levin shouted out the grim truth. The locomotive wasn't stopping. Carmel had destroyed the brakes. Carter rushed to the controls, trying to force them, but nothing worked. Still midair, Zack steadied his revolver. He aimed at the train's wheels and pulled the trigger. The bullet shot forward with incredible speed, piercing through the metal casing. Then it exploded, tearing apart the wheels and sending the train screeching, grinding, and finally collapsing before it could reach Aria City. The Guardians had stopped the runaway train and saved the city from destruction. Now that the train had been stopped, the city was finally safe. The bike gang was gone, but the fight wasn't over. Hades still had to be dealt with if the crimes were ever going to end once and for all. Carter collapsed to the ground, exhausted and injured, his body aching after shielding his allies from the explosion. Richard, still loyal to Hades, ordered his policemen to arrest the Guardians. But this time the men refused. They had seen who the real heroes were. Instead of raising their weapons, they raised their hands in respect to the Guardians who had saved the city. The citizens who survived cheered, their relief and gratitude filling the streets. Later that night, many gathered at the bar to celebrate the victory. Anna served drinks as usual, but the atmosphere was different. People were talking about the Guardians' return. Some still carried fear, knowing Hades' guards were hunting Zack and the others. The bar owner had reached his limit. He shouted that he was done being Hades' lapdog and called out to anyone willing to stand with him. Almost everyone raised their cups in defiance. The doors suddenly burst open. Hades' guards stormed in, weapons raised, declaring that anyone who resisted Hades would be executed as traitors. Before they could fire, a shot rang out. One of the guards dropped instantly, a bullet in his head. Levin stood behind him, gun smoking. Not only Levin, but the bar owner and the citizens grabbed their rifles too, firing back and cutting down the guards. The people had finally risen together. At the same time, Slade went to inform Hades that the entire city now knew Zack had returned. Hades dismissed it, calling the citizens citizens' defiance nothing more than false hope. Outside Hades' stronghold, the streets were filled with people demanding that he leave. Hades, confident in his power, ordered his guards to kill them. Tanks rolled into position, and then a massive hologram of Hades appeared above the crowd. His voice thundered as he claimed he had saved them, that he had protected the city, and that they had no right to demand anything from him. But the citizens weren't fooled anymore. They knew the truth. He had deceived them, and the guardians had left because of him. Now, with their eyes open, nothing could stop them. Hades gave the order again. Kill them all. The guards opened fire, but this time the police sided with the people, unleashing their own barrage against Hades' forces. Then Carter charged into the battlefield, tearing through guards with his bare hands. With his strength, even armored vehicles didn't stand a chance against him. Levin stood tall beside the bar owner and the armed citizens, raising his rifle high. His voice rang out over the chaos, urging the people not to lose hope, reminding them that the future was theirs. The bar owner asked Levin where Zack and Hedgehog were. Levin told him they had gone straight into the heart of the enemy's territory to stop the fight. Zack and Hedgehog were now walking through the middle of Hades' palace. The tower ahead was blocked by countless goblins. Hedgehog handed Zack her grappling hook, told him not to die, and then charged into the goblins to hold them off. Zack used the hook to reach the tower, where Hades was waiting. Inside, Hades greeted him, but Zack demanded he stop attacking innocent civilians, declaring that he would be the one to end the war. Hades tried his old trick again, threatening to destroy the city's water system, Aria's only source of survival. But this time Zack was ready. He simply replied, "Do whatever you want." At the same time, Slade was planting bombs all over the water system. Back in the tower, Zack continued, saying that as long as the people of Aria City worked together, nothing was impossible. That's when Hades realized something was wrong. Down below, Slade dropped the bombs and his weapon. He had turned against Hades, thanks to Grinder, who despite being in rough shape, had convinced him of the truth. Hades refused to surrender. He injected himself again with the glowing green liquid, his body surging with strength, and lunged at Zack. Zack didn't dodge. He took the punch head-on. Furious, Hades demanded to know why Zack was interfering now of all times. Zack answered that he had only come to say goodbye to Lola, but instead found the city she loved destroyed. Then Zack raised his revolver and fired 3 bullets. The moment Zack's bullets touched Hades' body, they dropped to the ground without leaving a mark. Still, Zack had one last trick up his sleeve. He kept firing, but the bullets bounced off again. Refusing to give in, Zack dashed forward, spinning his revolver, and pressed it right against Hades' side. He pulled the trigger and declared, "I'll be the spark that lights the flames of a new Aria City." Then he went all out, unloading shot after shot into the same spot. The bullets finally began to pierce through Hades' body. But Hades grabbed Zack's head in his massive hand and started crushing it. Zack didn't stop. He kept firing into the same wound until the bullets tore through Hades' body and shattered the capsules of green liquid strapped to his back. Hades roared in pain and hurled Zack across the room, slamming him into the wall. He picked up Zack's revolver, ready to finish him off. But before he could pull the trigger, Grinder came crashing down from above, wielding Slade's scythe. He drove the blade straight into the wound Zack had opened. Grinder shouted for Zack to get up. He apologized, his voice heavy with regret. At the same time, Hedgehog was still locked in battle against the goblins, while Carter, Levin, the police, and the citizens fought together outside to save their city. Grinder's words rang out. Aria City was still alive. It was just waiting for the right moment. Hades cracked the scythe in half, ripping off the upper blade and stabbing it deep into Grinder's shoulder. He sneered, babbling that with his death, war would rise all over again. Grinder didn't give him the satisfaction. He braced his legs, shoved himself to the side, yanked the scythe piece out of his shoulder, and reached for the switch strapped to his chest. With one last look at Zack, he gave his goodbyes and pressed it. The explosion tore through the tower, fire and smoke swallowing both Grinder and Hades in one final blast. Meanwhile, Slade had reached Hades' lab. He shut it down completely, and with that, every machine collapsed. Outside, the guards fell lifeless to the ground. Most of them had been robotic all along. The war was finally over. Aria City had its freedom back. If it weren't for the Guardians, no one would have risen up at all. Time passed. Carter took charge of rebuilding, leading the construction and repairs. Hedgehog became an officer, sworn to protect the people. Levin stepped forward as the new mayoral candidate, ready to guide the city into its future. On the day of Levin's speech, the people gathered to listen. Zack was there too, the old gunslinger who had carried so much of this fight. As Levin spoke, the skies opened and rain began to fall. Anna was outside, collecting the water with a smile, while the city embraced its new beginning. And with that, the story of Aria City came to a close, hard-fought, bloody, but victorious.